ghosts, psychics, pendulums, curses, hexes. We welcome you here to Friday Night Dark in the realm of the night. Come join us and listen to this week's presentation, and we bid you welcome.
Good evening, this is Drew, and I welcome you back to Friday Night Dark. Hey, tonight, I'm going to revisit the subject of dreams. No, really. I spoke about it once, and I even had a commercial tease that talked about it. Psychologists who study dreams, they actually make reference to it as onirology or oneirology. I can't remember the exact pronunciation, but basically they study dreams themselves and what they were. Now, I told you that dreams were subconscious states that were played out while you sleep. But there are folks who dream, and it's a form of dream where there is a little bit of control, if not total. They call that lucid dreaming. Now, a lucid dream is a type of dream wherein the person who is experiencing the dream realizes that they are dreaming and then goes about making conscious efforts to experience all that there is to do in that dream and retain full memory of what goes on. The capacity to have lucid dreams is apparently trainable, and it's a cognitive skill that during a lucid dream, the dreamer can gain some amount of volitional control. And they can do so over the characters in their dream, the narrative, or even the environment. If one is able to do that while dreaming, I wonder if there is truth to that really messed up dream movie, that one on Elm Street. I know it's kind of corny, but I need to look there, because a lot of times Hollywood, the best films seem to come from concepts that, although very basic, might carry some truth to them. And I think that touches the psychological nerve of some people, as you would say. But moving on, there are arguments about lucid dreaming and the states that you are in when this takes place. Now, this is partly because there are two states before you go to sleep and also just before waking up. And there's a lot of argument of whether or not this is playing some influence in that lucid dreaming that you're having. Here is what they are. The first one is called hypnagogia. And that's a transitional state from being awake, like me just talking to you right now, to actually falling asleep. So as you are falling asleep, you get to that hypnagogic state or hypnagogia. And so when you're in that state, you're still semi-conscious, but you're about to fall asleep. The parts that define consciousness from unconscious thinking are starting to shut down, if you will. I sometimes like to use that analogy as like if you were turning your computer off and you go to that process where it says, shut off or shut down or whatnot, and it starts to do weird stuff, and you hear weird noises emanating from your computer or from your portable computer or what have you, and then it just turns off. But in the background, there's still things going on. Even though it's shut off, there might be things like a clock running or whatnot. And so much is the mind is that it does have that subconscious state, and certain things are still running. And so there you go. Hypnagogia definitely would be one state where you might see this lucid dreaming take place. There was a story I had of someone once who actually had a dream where they had became conscious that they were in the middle of some place where they became like some kind of leader, and then they were leading a war, and then they were captured, and then they were put in line to be in a firing squad to be executed, and then there was a loud clap of whatever door or whatever that he was there, and he woke up and he had this dream all within about like a minute and a half. And that's from him coming in from where he was commuting from on the front runner rail over here to when the door shut. So can you have these kinds of wakefulness type of dreams? Yes, I believe so. And I think he's a good example. But now there's the other side of this, and that's what they call hypnopompia. Now, the difference here is that you're in a state of consciousness that leads out of sleep. So just before you wake up, you're in a state that if you are dreaming, you can wake up more easily. Now, I would tell people, think nightmares. You know those ones that Hollywood paints out all the time? You know, something scares you silly to the point where you wake up and you're looking around and have some heavy breathing, maybe some sweat, you know. I probably could talk about aliens there with Sigourney Weaver, but no, really, the important part here is that it's a state of conscious thinking in both of those. And so I think where the argument lay is that when people are fully asleep and they have what they call rapid eye movement, or REM, that you're fully dreaming and that you don't have any control, because the definition of it is that it's a subconscious state. That means that you have no control over what's going on. It's just doing whatever the subconscious is doing. There was a composer I spoke to once about dreams, and he said that it's kind of like a symphony that has several players in it, and that when the conductor is gone, meaning you, that the symphony will start to practice and sometimes start playing music of its own without you controlling it. And I think that's where some of that argument comes into play. Because in both of those states, you're technically still conscious. And if lucid dreaming is somehow taking advantage of both of those states, then it's very plausible where the argument could be that you're really not in a dream. You're just controlling some kind of vision. But let's continue. There seems to be that debate about, as I mentioned, about making there seems to be this whole thing about the states themselves, and in some cases, people even mention a form of self-hypnosis, which I did cover some time ago, and I know in some cases hypnosis itself is a similar state to what lucid dreaming is. In either state, one can say that this is why we have those nightmares or those night terrors as well. If you think about it for a second, you're trying to pry into some place that you're going to see things that you may not have experienced in that conscious state of mind before. And they may not be completely normal. Just keep that in mind. But maybe this is why when some folks wake up and they are not awake, that they start to see things. I know I've had those a few times where I wake up and I see all kinds of weird visions and things around me, from like faces of things to people. In some cases, I know it's been argued that perhaps that hypnopompia might be in play when I woke up and I saw that figure standing at the foot of my bed. Was that really a real thing, or was it just that wakefulness and I just somehow easily woke up from that and then it was gone? That's the argument that I know people tend to kind of go into if you're going to debunk things. Hey, nothing wrong with that. I think it's important that at least we try to look at the realistic and explainable aspect of these first. And that's why I'm kind of going this path. But there are also folks who sleepwalk. And I would wonder about them that if they wake up, you know, they say not to do it. Just get them back to bed, gently guide them there, and let them go back to sleep. There have been many times I know that folks have like walked into my room and I would be straight up in bed looking right at them, and they would just say, go back to sleep. And I would. Now, I'm grouping all this in there because By what is presented, it may be a state of mind which parallels what I've laid out with those two states, just before sleeping and just before waking up. And I think that's kind of where I'm going with that in a sense, is that this lucid dreaming could be something that is truly being controlled. The question should be, in what state are we actually controlling it? Are we truly in that REM state? Are we truly somewhere in between? That's where the argument lay for a lot of folks. Now, the term lucid dream itself was coined by a Dutch author and a psychiatrist, Frederick von Eden, in his 1913 article, sorry about that, a study of dreams. And through, though the descriptions of dreamers were being aware that they are dreaming predate the article itself, it's one of the first times that folks are actually using it in a sense of like it's being addressed scientifically, if you will. Now, there is also a psychologist, Stephen LaBerge, who is widely considered the progenitor and leading pioneer of modern lucid dreaming research. And he is the founder of the Lucidity Institute at Stanford University. One of the things that they had pointed out is that some of their subjects, they were able to actually say things to them to signal that they were lucidly dreaming by moving their eyes in that REM state. And this took over some time. And one of the things that they did say is, send us a signal and this is what you need to do. And they saw it. Now, is that the subconscious mind playing tricks on us? Is this kind of one of those, what do they call it, confirmation type bias things? Or is it truly happening? It's hard to say, but I know that in some cases folks have tried to been woken up from that and then they don't recall anything at all. And that's where the elusiveness begins of this whole subject. Now, one of the things they did do is that in their studies, that between these and the things that they're noted, they kind of had some things that were required to show that lucid dreaming itself was taking place. They go as follows. There was awareness of the dream state. There's an awareness of memory of all the functions. There is awareness of the dream environment itself. That means, if you're in a forest, you're going to see all the details of the forest, the bark, you're going to feel the wind, you're going to smell, and all that stuff like that. There's an awareness of the meaning of the dream. That means that if the forest itself is an archetype, you're going to know exactly what it's painting for you. So you're going to know also the foreshadowing and whatever, what do they call that? Ironic, something irony, I can't remember, dramatic irony that goes along with that dream. And the other things that were mentioned is that there's going to be an awareness of concentration and focus, the subjective clarity of the dream. Now, this is one thing that they did bring out, is that if you're handed a piece of paper in a dream, you're not going to be able to read it. There's no way you can read it at all. But yet, someone who is lucid dreaming, they could see it. This was actually brought about not only in something written, but also this is something that was shown how it would look and play out, where a woman in one story was, she wrote something on a piece of paper and taped it to the ceiling, and she was having this repetitive nightmare. And so to prove that she was just dreaming, she would look up for this piece of paper, and if it was blurry and she couldn't read it, then she was dreaming, and that's how she was able to validate it. There's just one small problem with that whole process. If she was able to actually lucidly dream and know she was dreaming and look for that, then she just negated everything that was just said before. I don't know, but I'm just pointing this out. I know it's a story, but you can see where I was kind of going with that, hopefully, is that there has to be some limitation to it, perhaps. But the lucid dreamers themselves, according to everything, is that they are aware of the actions themselves that they do will not carry out after waking up. That means, like, if they go and they've got like a gun in their hand and they've got 1,000 zombies coming at them and they're shooting them all, they know that when they wake up, there's not going to be a gun in their hand. They know that there isn't going to be 1,000 zombies headed towards them or whatnot. And of course, the physical laws need not apply in that dream. So that means that they could fly, they could grow wings out of nowhere, they could start flapping them up into the sky and, diving through the clouds to try to avoid whatever. Or maybe perhaps they turn into 1,000 Michonnes and they all start, whacking away with swords and going after the zombies in the form of, say, The Walking Dead. And so I probably would say that if you're able to change these things and not carry them over once you wake up, hey, you're lucidly dreaming. And this is why I sometimes think about that horror flick, Nightmare on Elm Street. Some of what is said comes up here. I know Hollywood does paint a bad reference to scare you, but that spills into many things while awake. For example, I had in-laws that when they moved to a specific neighborhood, that they fought like hell when they heard that their street was going to be renamed Elm Street. I guess they were traumatized by the movie, but frankly, it does paint that kind of a realm of thinking. People may associate bad things with street names. Mockingbird Lane, Cemetery Lane. I can think of 2 houses that live on those streets. I really feel sorry for their neighbors because they share that street. Well, except for the Addams family. Anyhow, there's also references in H.P. Lovecraft stories. There's one in particular that's called Hypnos, and the protagonist of the story and his friend enter the dream world by way of drugs. And if I'm right, it's lucid dreaming, but all the same. And in some cases, it lands them in a little bit of trouble. Thus the story. But I digress. Lucid dreaming can be beneficial to a number of aspects of life. Some risks have been suggested. Those who have never had a lucid dream may not understand what is happening when they experience it for the first time. And so there is the risk of having some form of PTSD, or perhaps you might experience what they call a psychotic break. And what they mean by that is that your sense of reality becomes very questionable. And so they have these reality test checks that you're supposed to do to make sure that you're awake and you're not dreaming. And so it goes back to some of those rules that I was reading about that the Lucidity Institute actually had laid out. I think somewhere in the midst of it all, though, if I was to interject anything, is the folks that experience these things, whether they be drug-induced or just by, some kind of, self-hypnosis, either way, the idea of retaining those experiences, and for that matter, the behaviors that you drag out with them, do they become your reality after the fact, or they stay where they're supposed to, and that is in your subconscious mind, never to really manifest themselves except in your time of sleep? Does this also influence your sleep behavior? Will you not go to sleep as quickly? This has been brought up several times, even for folks who have those night terrors, or perhaps they sleepwalk. You have to wonder if there's something that goes on at that point. Now, there have been some who've reported some kind of sleep paralysis when they're waking up out of these things. That means you just can't move at all. And I've mentioned that before as well. If you remember, we talked about this. It comes to things where people might have spoken and created lore in the avoidance and survival of such an event like sleep paralysis. And, it does make one think that if there was lore for that type of a situation, and also for avoiding people from being woken up while sleepwalking, could they all be related to lucid dreaming somehow? This is why I think it's there, because I've seen people in those states where there's sleep paralysis or sleepwalking, and they've done some really weird stuff and pull it off. I'll give you one example before I move on. There was one person who was sleepwalking. They didn't realize they were doing it. And in one instance, they got up and they went somewhere and they moved an entire couch by themselves. They didn't pick it up over their head. They just picked up one end of this really heavy couch And they moved it in such a way that it's not only quiet, but then they laid it down very gently with full control, looking for something. And then they picked it up and moved it back. And, I, this, like I said, it bleeds over a lot of stuff here, but it does make me think that maybe there is some truth to what's going on there in that sleep behavior, whether in these types of things going on, or perhaps maybe, just having trouble. Maybe insomnia could be why this is happening, and they're attributing it to something else. Just saying. Now, there is this kind of experience, as I mentioned before. It's one that goes back to ancient times. And go back to that word I was talking about, that oneirology. There is a phrase for it. It's oneiromancy. And basically what that means is oneros, which is dream, that's Greek, and then mansia, which is prophecy. So it's dream prophecy by the breakdown of the word. The concept of oneirmancy is a form of divination that's based upon dreams, and also uses dreams to predict the future. Now, I know in the past I've mentioned that dreams themselves were basically chance and pretty much just educated guessing from a long time of consideration at the subconscious level. They don't necessarily come true. Matter of fact, only 1/3 of those dreams, according to one study, is how often they were correct. But they were correct. And so this is where this oneirmancy comes from, because you're able to somehow hone your skills while dreaming to retain what has been shown to you, because it is based on the idea that they are of divine purpose and there is a message to be had. Now, in some cases, there are some of those ancient religions back then that they would take a form of like a drug, if you will. Like in the story of Hypnos from Lovecraft, these plants are used to produce or enhance a dreamlike state. And so one would say, well, then this goes back, are those drugs really causing someone to lucidly dream? I don't know. But what I do know is that there has to be some truth in those things, especially if people are writing about them in such a way. I don't think it's completely fiction. And considering the fact that some of the people that I've seen write about it generally tend to be more matter of fact, will probably give you the same kind of explanation I'm giving, if not similar. They might have more words and they might have a deeper explanation, but I try to keep it as less sciencey as possible. There is a reason why I'm kind of being this way with this, is that this is kind of me expanding on dreams themselves, and this is one aspect that I've been wanting to go down for quite a while. And up until now, I've been kind of cringy about it, just because how to present it. So you can kind of see why I'm using all these things. I want to show you the science side of it and then contrast it with what people have said. But if drugs are used, it does validate the whole idea and possibly even the impetus behind Lovecraft's story of Hypnos. Now, occasionally, the dreamer feels as if they are transported to another time or place when they're dreaming, and this is all part of that whole oneirmancy I was talking about. And this is offered as evidence that they are in fact providing divine information to the people that are there upon their return from this dream state, whether they take the plants or drugs or what have you that do this, or if they manage to do so on their own. Now, the mind does not create anything while you're dreaming, as it's been said. So is it really possible that they are getting these messages if it's someplace they've never been to before? That's where I know it gets kind of sticky. Now, in many cultures, dreams were messages from the gods, and remembering them was meant as a point of the prophecy itself. That means if you didn't really retain it, or if there was just some picture or some idea that was there and retained, that was the prophecy, so to speak. But studies done in the past, as I mentioned, have suggested that it's not necessarily true. Remember what I mentioned earlier, that 1/3 of those dreams actually do come true. That means that there were 2/3 that didn't. And I know this is a study that was done back in the 1970s. But any type of dream remembered was not prophecy, but rather circumstance, is the way that they played it out. I would disagree with that just a little bit because there's always those biblical and there's always those allegorical type of references where people were having these dreams and then they came to pass. I know I always talk about movies, and I'm sure it's very evident that I watch quite a few. But there is another one with Dustin Hoffman, and he actually is telling someone who had a dream that things were going on around them. It was all kinds of chaos, and they were seeing people die. And then, as they were experiencing everything, Dustin Hoffman's character turns to the guy who told him this dream and said, "We're invisible." And they blatantly walk out of where they were and they go to safety's sake, and they're trying to get people to follow them, and no one can see them. And they watch the entire village they live in die. So were they really invisible, or was it just that they didn't account for themselves? Can't say. But that was one instance where it was questionable whether the dream itself was prophecy, or perhaps maybe it was interpreted differently. And maybe because of the true absurdity of their behavior as a result of that is why they were invisible to everybody. Perhaps because it was just too ridiculous that people are just blatantly just walking through this whole thing. How many cartoons have you watched in your life that you would see things where someone's walking through a war zone and they think they're mosquitoes or flies and they're just batting them away like it's nobody's business? So is it something along those guidelines? I can't say. But the subconscious maybe could be anticipating what's going on, and then it's just good guesswork, maybe. Now, there is the lucid dream portion, which makes one think about this differently. Perhaps it's not just recall, but the journey and the experience of the dream state that we share. And so, going back to Lovecraft, there is another story that does induce that dream state. And the title of it is The Dream Quest of the Unknown Kadath. And in it, one of his recurring characters, Randolph Carter, is questing in his dream state for an objective. And yet, at the end, he finds out that everything he was looking for was really not that far away, and he didn't have to dream at all. So, it just goes and plays on a reality. Are the dreams themselves ones that we just have in the background as an archetype, a background, a stage perhaps, and the drapes are drawn away to reveal pictures that were painted long ago? Or maybe it's something else. It could be another world, a place, another dimension. Well, that's hard to say. I found people who said, never ask about a date and time when you're trying to do this lucid dreaming. There were others that said that if you know that you're actually lucidly dreaming, don't tell anyone. As a matter of fact, there was one person that had said that if you do realize that you're in the dream and you start talking to someone that way, that they'll probably tell you to stay quiet or they will find you. A while back, I watched a movie called Dreamscape. I think that one had Dennis Quaid in it, I think. He was involved in research for lucid dreaming, and they were using it as a form of information extraction as well as to get rid of people. I mean, like, make them dead. And I always wonder about that because it does touch on that Stargate project I was talking about before. We'll get to that in a second. But, of course, this whole lucid dream thing got to me. It has pretty much gone all over the place, I know, in what I've been talking about. But what if there was a they? What if there are other rules that are not spoken, not established by this Lucid Dreaming Institute? You got to think about this for a second. Remember, they're just divers and they're just jumping into the ocean with very basic gear, and they're looking at the ocean for the first time and they see what they can, and they look down and realize there's this murky darkness still. And it's not easy for them to go deeper, but they know it's there. What if there are other things lurking in this ocean they've dived into that could be more dangerous than we think? You can see where I'm going with this, I hope. Watching videos, I did find folks talking about similar looking person that watches for lucid dreamers. And it's kind of like a Freddy Krueger of sorts. Maybe they are the things lurking in that darkness that we see. I mean, after all, if you jump into an ocean, sometimes there are things people think of that are not necessarily pretty to see, and they know is something you don't want to see. Like, say, a shark, maybe a whale with its mouth wide open, maybe it's some other type of like strange looking swimming creature that could have spines or jelly like tentacles ready to wrap itself around you and suck the life out of you. I don't know. But although they all seemed unrelated in the research I was doing, and there were a lot of separate tales, I have to wonder they're touching on some very similar ideas, and I have to wonder if there is some truth to this guy that they're talking about. So, what does he do? Is he an enforcer of some sort? I can't say completely. I'm still kind of like researching this whole thing still because there's a lot to touch on here. And it's more like a progress report, I guess, that I'm giving about this type of dreaming. But folks have said that there is someone out there when you're doing this and he's watching. And perhaps maybe there's like some kind of threat detector he's got. Maybe he's some kind of enforcer, a shark that's watching for you. And if you're doing something that is completely out of the ordinary, maybe that's when he shows up. I don't know. But it does make me ask, if there was no truth to lucid dreaming in the things that you could do, why is it a topic, and why are there schools that promise to get a better living from it? And you're probably wondering why I would say that. There is actually a school that offers training for lucid dreaming, besides the one at Stanford I was talking about. This means it may be a may not be a paranormal topic completely, but is it truly as consistent as they say? I would probably want to ask, what would motivate folks to even do that if there were risks like that murky darkness you would see as a diver? I couldn't say. I have to make mention again to Project Stargate, as I mentioned before. There was that CIA project for psychic warfare, and some folks noted there was a dream warfare section, and it did include some form of lucid dreaming. There are so many things that are still conjecture and rumor to this that I'm still actually kind of touching on this in many ways. And one day we'll probably see something else going on with that, because some of the subjects I know I'm planning to touch on are going to be around the Stargate project, as I mentioned before. But I'm still looking at that. And one day I might surmount the issue and see what pops out. But it is true that, the concept is not a new one. And in some cases, there are folks that practice yoga and meditation and whatnot. It is itself a physical exercise, if you will, but it's also spiritually tied. And it makes one think that it might have more significance. Perhaps maybe there is some kind of a form of, I guess, meditative and lucid dreaming that takes place from physical interaction somehow. It is indeed argued a form of wakefulness, but so is meditation, right? How many times have people gone into some place like a meditation chamber and come out with some truly psychic vision of some sort? I think that's something to think about. Now, we all must sleep to rejuvenate. And so in those moments of exhaustion, you feel the dream, you actually realize maybe you are dreaming. Now, I haven't had that experience yet of doing this whole lucid dreaming thing, but I've had numerous nightmares, and I've had a few sleep paralysis episodes. My experiences did have visions and a pressure on my chest for the sleep paralysis, but the nightmares, all aplenty, all of them weird and bizarre, freaky faces falling, and loud bangs as well. So I can't say if all of those things may be related to a lucid dream or not, but they are side effects all the same, I would think. But now there's that other thing night terrors. If you know what those are, people who suffer from those are plagued by that say that the same guy that I mentioned before, that they will find you, that enforcer and whatnot, they've actually had some description of the similar same face and description and behaviors. So does that mean they might have been lucid dreamers at one time? One such account I found did actually describe that and say that at one point he didn't realize he was actually lucidly dreaming, and then that's when he started having these night terrors. That person was around afterward. Was that a consequence of breaking those unspoken rules? Did this person touch that murky darkness too closely to wake up this other being, if you will? I don't know. I wonder, if they did break the rules, what rules did they actually break? It's hard to tell, right? Well, as I said before, I'm asking this because it was reported in one video that I found that there was this weird-looking guy. And much like the other previous descriptions, they were very similar, and it seems that this person waits for you. Like they could be in the background watching you. If you found yourself sitting in a food court and you were eating with friends, you might notice this guy in the background, and he's watching you intently. There were many recounts of people who said that this weird-looking guy, they felt them being watched by this guy. So, is he for real? I don't know. But why it's important is that if they end up with some form of night terror and flailing and screaming about. So is that all part of that PTSD? Is there a ghostly influence here? Are there Stargate soldiers, perhaps, that are still watching us? Officially, the CIA Project Stargate, that ended in 1995. But I found that as I was doing research with this and other subjects that touched it, there were more questions than I could find answers. And so I think the subject in itself can truly still be considered paranormal because it cannot be completely and totally explained. When that day comes, maybe we'll have more technology to prove it one way or the other. But until then, I guess we'll just have to keep doing what we do, right? Now, I will say that it is essential to acknowledge the limits of that lucidity and lucid dreaming altogether, as well as the malleability of dream content. It does and will contrast sharply with the rigidity of physical interactions. But knowing there are some things of this subject makes me wonder if this is a step into something bigger. The analogy of that ocean and the diver and what they see below. I know it just kind of is what I'm trying to get at here and show you the vastness of what can and could be. But that all remains to be seen. I do encourage it if you do actually want to try to explore the subject. And for some, it could be as simple as just keeping a journal, a dream journal. I've done it. And then seeing from that, do you find yourself finding these things, whether they be prophetic or possibly this guy that everyone talks about? I don't know. Does it sound adventurous to you? Well, I hope so. And having been keeping one for a while, I can certainly tell you I've had some pretty interesting dreams, and some of them have had some portents to some kind of a far future, if not immediate. I might share those with people one day, but not now. But if you're curious enough, give it a try. And if you do, hopefully you're going to talk about it. And if you do talk about it, maybe you might talk about it with me. Where else? Friday Night Dark at nighttracks.com. Hey, this is Drew, and I bid you good night.
Thanks for listening to Friday Night Dark. Coffee is one of those items you drink in the morning. With dessert. Perhaps whenever it's late. Or maybe even when it's a long day or night. Try Coffee USA for all your coffee supplies and needs. If you follow our link down below, you can enter a code at checkout. Friday Night Dark. Then when you make your purchase, you will get an extra 10% off. Come give it a try and see for yourself. Thanks for looking and thanks for listening to us here at nighttracks.com.